"Wait outside, ape." It came sharp, like glass shattering against marble. Heads turned instantly. Some gasped, some pretended not to hear, but every ear in range caught it. The words weren't whispered. They were a declaration, spoken by a woman in a crisp navy uniform, her hand raised like a barrier that sliced the air between her and the woman standing before her. That woman, dressed in a tailored white suit, carrying a simple black leather bag, didn't flinch. Her eyes locked forward, calm, steady, almost too steady for the insult that had just been hurled her way. The uniformed attendant's jaw was tight. Her scarf knotted like it held her authority together. Behind her, a cluster of passengers stood as witnesses, 2 men in suits, a woman in denim, a young traveler clutching his backpack, each caught in the uncomfortable theater of prejudice playing out in front of them. The insult still vibrated in the air. A child near the corner asked his mother what the word meant. She hushed him quickly, glancing with shame at the woman in white. A businessman shook his head slowly, as if trying to decide whether to intervene or to retreat into silence. Phones hovered at the edges, screens lit, unsure whether to record. The black woman stood at the center of it all. Her hands rested lightly on her bag strap. Her breathing was measured, almost deliberate, as though she'd rehearsed for this moment her entire life. Because she had, in her mind, echoes of earlier years stirred, a lobby in Atlanta where she'd been told she didn't look like someone staying in the penthouse. A boardroom in Houston where her ideas were dismissed until a white male colleague repeated them word for word. The sting was familiar. The setting changed, but the story was the same, only this time the audience was bigger, and the ending would be different. The attendant's hand didn't lower. She stood rigid, palm out, as if holding back a force she couldn't possibly control. The passengers behind her began to murmur, some disgusted, some curious, some quietly amused, as if the humiliation was entertainment. But the woman in white, the CEO no one recognized, didn't move, didn't shout, didn't defend herself. She let the silence sharpen the insult into something heavier, something undeniable, because silence wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of justice. And before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Her gaze shifted only slightly, toward the glowing flight board above the crowd. Calm, unmoved. Her presence alone cut through the chaos like a lighthouse through fog. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to remind anyone who she was. Not yet. The insult had already done its work. The room had chosen its sides. The line had been drawn. And in the silence that followed, you could feel it. The storm had only just begun. Her name was Amara Blake, 42 years old. Calm eyes, a presence that carried weight without needing to shout. To strangers in the terminal, she looked like any other professional traveler, white blazer, understated black bag, no entourage trailing behind her. But that was intentional. She wasn't here to be recognized. She was here to be tested. Amara's flight wasn't just another business trip. At the other end of that boarding gate waited a summit of international investors, men and women, who controlled billions in aviation infrastructure. And what most of them didn't know was that the quiet woman being denied entry at the terminal was the single largest private shareholder of the very airline they were about to discuss. She could have arrived with her team. She could have worn status on her wrist, on her lapel, on her luggage. Instead, she chose simplicity, a tailored white suit, a bag with no brand logo, no assistant trailing beside her, no power stamped across her clothing. Because Amara understood something too many in power forget. Prejudice hides best when it thinks it's unobserved. And today, she was observing. The insult, "Wait outside, ape," hadn't surprised her. Not entirely. She had heard softer versions her whole life. She had lived through harder ones, too. At 16, a hotel clerk in Charlotte told her the lobby was for guests only. At 24, an account manager in Miami froze her funds until she brought in a white male colleague to verify her. At 30, a real estate deal collapsed because the seller didn't feel comfortable transferring property to someone like her. Each insult etched itself into her memory not as weakness, but as data, as proof, as fire. And that fire had built Blake Global Holdings, a conglomerate with stakes across energy, real estate, technology, and airlines, including this one. Including the very gate she now stood beside. The attendant didn't know. The manager on his way didn't know. The passengers whispering and clutching their boarding passes didn't know. To them, she was just another passenger who didn't fit the image. To her, this was déjà vu, a scene replayed in endless variations across her life. Only this time, there were cameras. There were witnesses. There was a choice. Silence that ended in shame, or silence that grew into justice. Amara let the moment stretch. She didn't rush to reveal who she was. She didn't flash an ID card that carried more power than the uniforms in front of her. She simply stood, calm and steady, knowing the story was already writing itself. Because what the staff didn't realize was this: the woman they thought they were keeping out had built the doors they were guarding. And in less than an hour, she would walk into a boardroom where every decision-maker in the company would hear exactly what had happened at this gate. Not from a rumor, not from a lawsuit, but from her own lips. The white blazer, the quiet stance, the silence, they weren't weakness. They were strategy. They were armor. And right now, that armor was holding the storm in place, waiting for it to break exactly when she chose. The attendant didn't lower her hand. Her stance was rigid, jaw tight, voice louder than before. "Ma'am, you need to step aside. This lounge isn't for people like you." Her words sliced the air again, sharper this time because they carried the weight of procedure, fake procedure, but convincing enough for those who wanted to believe it. Passengers shifted uneasily. A man in a gray blazer muttered, "She should just go to economy." A college student with headphones around his neck shook his head, whispering, "That's messed up." But no one moved. Not yet. Amara stayed still, her bag strap looped over one wrist, her eyes calm. She didn't blink, didn't answer. Silence was heavier than protest, and the silence was beginning to press down on the attendant's nerves. That's when backup arrived. A man in his late 40s strode forward from behind the counter. Tall, shoulders squared, hair slicked back too neatly, badge clipped high on his chest. Martin Kane, Terminal Operations Manager. His eyes scanned Amara with the same cold efficiency he used to check faulty equipment. Except here, his conclusion came before inspection. "What's going on here?" he asked the attendant. "She tried to access the lounge without proper clearance," the woman replied quickly. "Refused to wait outside." Martin's eyes narrowed. He looked at Amara as though she were a glitch in the system, something to be debugged and deleted. Then his lips pressed into a thin line. "We have standards here," he said loudly, making sure the crowd heard. "This area is for real clients, not walk-ins pretending to belong." The words landed heavy. A woman near the window gasped softly. A teenager raised his phone higher, red recording light glowing. Martin noticed but didn't flinch. He was used to authority that silenced cameras. He stepped closer, voice dropping low, but not enough to hide from the nearest passengers. "You can save yourself some embarrassment. Go wait outside before security gets here." Amara didn't answer. Her stillness was unnerving, like a storm cloud that refused to move. The attendant crossed her arms now, emboldened by her manager's presence. "Sir, should I call it in?" she asked. Martin nodded once. "Do it." The ripple moved fast through the lounge. People leaned back, some whispering, others pulling out their phones to capture what was quickly becoming more than a check-in dispute. A mother hugged her daughter closer. Two businessmen exchanged glances, one smirking as if justice was being served, the other frowning in quiet disapproval. The attendant lifted the desk phone, pressing digits with a confidence that felt rehearsed. "Security," she said, her voice sharp. "Possible fraudulent entry. Need immediate response." The words echoed across the space like a stamp of authority, official and damning. Martin folded his arms. There, problem solved. But nothing was solved, because the woman in white hadn't moved. Not a step, not a word. And the longer she stood there, the clearer it became this wasn't a problem being solved. This was a fire being fed. Amara's eyes flicked to the ceiling lights, then back to Martin, calm, silent, watching. She had seen this play before, and she already knew how it ended. Martin's words still lingered in the air, thick and heavy. "This area is for real clients." The attendant's voice layered over his like an echo. "Possible fraudulent entry." Immediate response. The crowd buzzed in the wake of those declarations. Phones tilted higher. A cough broke the quiet, followed by a nervous laugh from somewhere in the back. But at the center of it all, Amara didn't move. Her bag still hung from her wrist. Her breathing stayed slow. Her face revealed nothing, no flare of anger, no plea for recognition, only stillness. The stillness unnerved Martin. He expected protest. He expected raised voices, maybe even tears, anything he could point to as disruptive behavior. But Amara gave him nothing. Her silence stripped the performance of authority from his words, leaving them naked, exposed. The attendant shifted her weight from one foot to the other, suddenly aware of the camera lights reflecting off her uniform. Her earlier confidence wavered as she adjusted her scarf, her voice faltering just slightly. "Ma'am," she said again, quieter this time, "if you just wait outside, this will all be easier." No reply. The silence worked like a mirror, forcing her to hear her own words out loud, forcing the audience around them to hear them too. Every syllable revealed bias that had been invisible until it echoed against Amara's calm. A boy with a baseball cap muttered, "Why is she so calm?" His sister whispered back, "Because she knows something." Their mother hushed them both, eyes darting nervously toward the unfolding scene. Amara's gaze remained steady, not on Martin, not on the attendant, but somewhere beyond them toward the glowing gate sign, toward the glass windows that showed planes gliding into place. Her stillness made it clear. She wasn't locked out of the future. She was letting the present betray itself. Martin cleared his throat, louder than necessary. "Security will be here shortly," he announced to no one in particular, as though volume could fill the cracks forming in his authority. "You're only making this harder on yourself." Still nothing. The silence was not compliance. It was strategy. Every second Amara stood without responding. The weight shifted. Every tick of the clock turned suspicion back onto those accusing her. The crowd felt it. The attendant felt it. Even Martin, arms folded tight, began to sense the air turning. For Amara, this wasn't new. At 25, she had learned that silence could wound deeper than words. She remembered the first time a loan officer laughed at her application, certain she couldn't understand the numbers. She hadn't argued. She'd simply folded the paperwork back into her folder, stood up, and walked out. A week later, she bought the property through a different lender, and the officer's bank lost the deal. Silence, then action that was her pattern. Here, at this gate, she repeated the same rhythm. Let them speak. Let them perform their prejudice for the crowd. Let them write their own indictment. Amara blinked slowly, once. That single movement felt louder than any outburst. It said, "I am not bending. I am not shrinking. I am waiting." And as the seconds stretched, the onlookers felt it too. This wasn't weakness. It was control. Silence had become the sharpest blade in the room. The hum of the terminal had shifted. It wasn't just the usual announcements and rolling suitcases anymore. It was a charged silence, broken by whispers, by the faint click of phone cameras snapping still frames of a scene too raw to ignore. Near the row of leather seats, a young man in a black hoodie lifted his phone higher. His lock screen flashed for a second before the red light appeared. Recording. He whispered into the mic, "This woman's being denied entry. They're calling security." His voice trembled, not from fear, but from disbelief. 2 seats away, an older white woman clutched her handbag tighter, frowning. She muttered to the man beside her, "She should just do what they say." The man shook his head slowly. "Not right. Not the way they're speaking to her." Further back, a Latina mother with her teenage daughter pulled out her phone. She didn't aim it at Amara yet. She aimed it at the uniformed attendant. The daughter whispered, "Mom, are you really filming this?" The mother replied, "People need to see." And they did. Already, a ripple of quiet indignation was spreading. Not loud enough to stop the abuse, but enough to plant a seed. Something about this was off, Martin noticed. His eyes flicked toward the phones, then back to Amara. "Turn those off," he barked, his voice rising with authority. "This is a private matter." But it wasn't private anymore. A boy in his 20s with wire-rimmed glasses called out, "She's just standing there. Why are you calling security?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Heads turned. A few nodded in agreement. The attendant's face flushed. "Sir, please don't interfere." "I'm not interfering," the boy replied, phone still steady in his hand. "I'm witnessing." That word witness hung in the air like a spark. The teenager in the baseball cap, who had been whispering earlier, finally stood. "Yeah," he said, louder now, emboldened by the moment. "She hasn't done anything. Why are you treating her like that?" His sister tugged his sleeve nervously, but he didn't sit down. The crowd began to shift. What had been passive observation was tipping into defense. Amara remained silent, still calm, but inside she felt it, the current moving. Witnesses were becoming allies. The silence she had held on to was no longer hers alone. It was multiplying, spreading through strangers who recognized injustice when it stood too plainly in front of them. The attendant glanced at Martin, panic flickering in her eyes. He hissed under his breath, "Control the room!" But the room was slipping. From the far side, a businessman in a navy suit lowered his briefcase. "I've flown this airline for 15 years," he said firmly, "and I've never seen a passenger treated this way." His words landed like a verdict. A few claps sounded hesitant at first, then stronger. Not applause of celebration, but of solidarity. The uniformed attendant froze, phone still pressed to her ear, waiting for security. The cameras were everywhere now. Every angle was being captured, every insult recorded. Amara finally blinked, just once, and lifted her gaze toward the crowd. She didn't need to speak. The witnesses had done it for her. The story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who dared to look and say, "This isn't right." And in that instant, the tide began to turn. The buzz of voices had grown restless, like static before a storm. Witnesses were no longer quiet. They were murmuring, questioning, documenting. And for Martin Kane, the operations manager, that was a problem. His authority was slipping in real time. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, voice rising above the noise. "Enough," he barked. "Everyone calm down. This woman is not a verified guest. She's trespassing." The word hit like a gavel. Trespassing. Gasps rippled across the lounge. Phones tilted higher. A young man near the glass wall muttered, "That's not true, she just showed her ticket." Another replied, "They don't even care." Martin pressed on, louder, almost theatrical. "This is fraud, plain and simple. People like her come in every week with fake passes, thinking they can sneak their way into premium lounges." His words weren't just procedural, they were poisoned, dripping with contempt. The attendant at his side nodded eagerly, emboldened by his aggression. "Sir, she wouldn't even answer my questions. She refused to leave when instructed. That's non-compliance." A businessman in the corner raised his voice. "Non-compliance with what? Standing still?" Laughter, sharp and bitter, rippled through the crowd. But Martin ignored it, face hardening. "Security is on their way," he declared, "and if she resists, she'll be detained." The accusation hung there, heavy and humiliating. The uniformed staff were no longer just blocking Amara, they were painting her as a criminal in front of 100 strangers. A woman in a denim jacket shook her head furiously. "She hasn't said a word. This is disgusting," Martin snapped back. "Ma'am, stay out of this. We're protecting the integrity of this facility." But his voice cracked on the word integrity, because even he could feel it. The crowd wasn't buying the script anymore. Still, he doubled down. He turned to Amara, eyes narrowing into a glare meant to intimidate. "You don't belong here, you hear me? This space is for real clients, not for imposters dressed up to play a part." The insult landed harder than the word fraud. It wasn't just procedural anymore, it was personal. Phones captured it from every angle. Someone whispered, "That's it. He just killed his own career." Amara remained motionless, but inside, she marked the shift. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Not the first insult, not the call for security, this. The open contempt, undeniable, documented, impossible to spin. Her silence was still intact, but the silence of the witnesses had broken wide open. From the back, a voice rang out clear, defiant. "She's not the problem. You are." It was the teenager in the baseball cap again, standing taller now, shaking but unyielding. The crowd stirred. Others nodded, whispered, muttered agreements. A line had been crossed, and the room knew it. Martin adjusted his badge, jaw tight, trying to mask his unease. But it was too late. His words weren't just an attack on Amara, they had exposed the prejudice he thought he was hiding. And the witnesses weren't just watching anymore. They were choosing sides. The tension was already tight as wire. Then it snapped. Martin Kane didn't wait for security. He stepped forward, close enough that the shine of his badge brushed the light onto Amara's white blazer. In one swift motion, he snatched the boarding pass from her hand. The paper crumpled between his fingers as if it didn't matter. As if she didn't matter. "Fake," he spat, his voice carrying over the crowd. "This isn't valid. This is trash." And with deliberate cruelty, he tore it in two. The sound was small, a simple rip of paper, but it detonated like a bomb in the room. Gasps ricocheted off the glass walls. Someone dropped their coffee. Phones zoomed closer, catching every angle of the act. Amara didn't move. She didn't reach for the shreds of paper that fluttered to the floor. She simply stood, hands relaxed at her sides, her silence pressing harder than ever. But the witnesses erupted. "That's her ticket," shouted the young man in the hoodie, his phone raised higher now. "She showed it to us." The woman in the denim jacket was on her feet. "You can't just destroy someone's pass. That's illegal." Martin ignored them. He turned, held up the torn halves like evidence, and sneered. "This is what happens when people try to cheat the system." A murmur of anger rippled through the lounge. Not just whispers this time, words, loud and unfiltered. "That's not right. You can't do that." She didn't even fight back. The attendant's face had gone pale. She tugged nervously at her scarf, glancing at the cameras. Her voice wavered as she added, "Security is on the way. She'll be escorted out immediately." And then another escalation. A security officer, younger, broad-shouldered, appeared at the entrance, radio clipped to his vest. He scanned the scene, eyes landing on Amara, then on the crowd of recording phones. Martin gestured toward her sharply. "That's the suspect. Remove her." The word suspect was a knife. The witnesses gasped again, louder this time. The boy in glasses shouted, "She's not a suspect. She hasn't done a thing." The security officer hesitated. His hand hovered near his belt, but his eyes flicked to the sea of glowing screens. He knew whatever he did next wouldn't be contained. It would live online forever. Still, Martin pressed harder, voice booming. "Do your job! She's a fraud! Get her out now!" The officer stepped closer. The air thickened, the crowd pressing forward as if to form a barrier. A mother pulled her daughter behind her but kept filming anyway. A businessman muttered, "This is going viral in 5 minutes." And through it all, Amara stood still, not pleading, not resisting, not lowering her gaze. Her silence was louder than the chaos, louder than Martin's accusations, louder than the rip of her boarding pass, louder than the calls for removal, because in that silence, the room understood something. She wasn't the one on trial. They were. The torn boarding pass still lay on the polished floor, its pieces spread like evidence of arrogance. Martin stood taller, certain he had won, certain the crowd would accept his verdict. But Amara Blake didn't reach down. She didn't even look at the scraps. Instead, she slowly slipped her hand into her blazer pocket and drew out her phone. The simple act shifted the energy, calm, precise, deliberate. Her thumb pressed one button. A single line lit the screen. "Activate protocol." Her voice was low, steady, but in the charged silence it carried across the lounge. On the other end of the line, a crisp voice responded instantly. "Yes, Miss Blake. Logging the incident now. Do you want real-time verification engaged?" Amara's eyes didn't leave Martin. "Engage everything." The words were quiet, but they landed like thunder. The crowd stirred. Witnesses leaned closer, phones catching both sides of the conversation. The teenager in the cap whispered, "She's not scared at all." Martin frowned. "Who are you calling? That's not going to change anything. Security's already on their way." But his voice wavered. Because on Amara's screen, logos flickered corporate insignias, system dashboards, access keys only top-level executives would recognize. She turned the phone slightly, letting the glow reflect just enough for nearby passengers to glimpse. One woman gasped. That looks official." The man with glasses leaned forward, squinting. "No way. That's their internal system." Martin's jaw tightened. "Fake. Screens can be faked. Don't let her trick you." But his certainty cracked as Amara spoke again into the phone, her voice calm as ever. "Record timestamp. Video feed active. Cross. Verify my access with the central office." "Yes, ma'am," came the reply. "Protocol running. All relevant staff identities are being logged. System shows 2 unauthorized attempts to revoke your boarding clearance." Murmurs rippled. Passengers exchanged looks. The boy in the hoodie muttered to his stream, "She's in their system. She's actually in it." The attendant's face went pale. "Sir," she whispered to Martin, "what if she's not lying?" Martin snapped, too loud. "She is. She's nothing. Just another scam artist who—" He cut himself short, because Amara finally lifted her gaze from the phone to him, her eyes steady, unshaken. "You've made the wrong assumption," she said softly, but every syllable was razor-sharp. "And the whole world is watching you make it." A heavy silence fell again. Cameras caught his clenched jaw, her calm posture, the glowing phone between them. The security officer, still lingering near the entrance, shifted uncomfortably. His radio crackled, but he didn't move forward. The crowd's presence was too strong, the story too clear. Amara ended the call with one tap. Her phone screen dimmed, but the weight of what she'd set in motion remained. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't point to the torn pass on the floor. She didn't need to, because in that moment, it was obvious. She wasn't the one who needed defending. She was the one quietly, decisively preparing to strike back. And when she did, the fallout wouldn't be limited to this gate. It would shake the entire airline. The crowd buzzed with a nervous energy, cameras raised, whispers darting back and forth like sparks in dry air. Martin's face was taut with irritation. His confidence stretched thin, but still he tried to hold control. "Security will remove you," he barked. "You can play with your phone all you want. It won't change the fact that you don't belong here." But Amara's silence pressed harder than his words. And then, she broke it not with anger, not with shouting, but with precision. "I don't belong here?" she asked, her tone calm even. She tilted her head slightly, her voice loud enough to cut across the lounge. "Interesting, because I built this place." Gasps rippled instantly. Someone whispered, "Wait, what did she just say?" A phone zoomed closer. Martin laughed a brittle, uneasy sound. "Built this place? You?" He shook his head, waving dismissively. "Ridiculous. Do you really expect anyone here to believe that?" Amara didn't blink. She reached into her bag and drew out a slim, leather-bound case. From it, she produced a single embossed card metal, not plastic. She held it between two fingers, the gold lettering catching the overhead light. "Blake Global Holdings," she said evenly. "Largest private shareholder of this airline." The room froze. The businessman in the navy suit inhaled sharply. "Blake? As in the Blake?" His voice cracked with realization. The teenager in the cap nearly shouted, "She's the owner! She's literally the owner!" Phones surged forward, flashes of screens capturing every angle of the revelation. Martin's face went pale, but still he tried. "No, this is a trick. Anybody can print a fancy card." Amara's lips curved slightly, not into a smile but into something sharper. "Then perhaps you should check your system. My name is in it, Executive Override Clearance. Try denying it. I'll wait." The attendant fumbled at the keyboard behind the counter, her fingers trembling. She typed, paused, typed again, and then her face drained of color. It's there," she whispered, barely audible, but the microphone on someone's phone caught it. "Executive level. Override clearance." The words set the lounge ablaze. Witnesses gasped, shouted, some clapped, others cursed under their breath. The businessman muttered, "I can't believe what I just saw." Martin's voice cracked, desperation replacing authority. This doesn't change anything. But Amara cut him off, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "You called me a fraud in an airline I own. You tore up my boarding pass at a gate I built. You tried to humiliate me in front of witnesses who will now never forget what they saw." Every word landed heavier than the last. Phones captured it, hearts pounded with it. Even the security officer, still frozen at the entrance, lowered his hand from his radio, his face unreadable but his silence telling. Amara stepped forward once, the crowd instinctively parting around her. She didn't shout, she didn't rush. She simply walked into the space Martin thought he controlled. And with every step, the truth grew louder. She wasn't just another passenger. She was the storm they had invited in. The revelation detonated like thunder in the lounge. For a moment, no one moved. Then the chaos began. The attendant's face drained first. Her fingers still hovered over the keyboard, the executive clearance glowing on her monitor like a sentence she couldn't erase. She stumbled back from the desk, scarf crooked, hands trembling. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The cameras caught it all, her panic, her unraveling composure. Beside her, a second clerk tried to shrink into the background, sliding papers around the desk as if busyness might make him invisible. His eyes flicked from Amara to the crowd, then to Martin, desperate for direction that wouldn't come. And Martin, once so loud, so sure, was pale now. His posture cracked. His arms, once crossed in dominance, hung limp at his sides. Sweat beaded at his hairline. He opened his mouth, shut it, opened it again, but the words refused to come. The crowd smelled it fear. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone could see it. Phones zoomed closer. Someone whispered, "Look at him. He's finished." The teenager in the baseball cap grinned, adrenaline rushing. "Told you she wasn't lying," he shouted. His sister tugged his sleeve, half scared, half proud. The businessman in navy muttered, "Unbelievable. They tried to throw her out of her own company." He shook his head in disbelief, still recording. The security officer, caught in the middle, froze. His hand twitched near his radio, but the tide had turned so strongly he didn't dare move against it. Cameras had locked on him too, waiting for his choice. His jaw tightened, and then slowly he lowered his hand. The witnesses pressed forward now, no longer timid. A woman in denim stepped closer to Amara, standing at her side. "We saw everything," she said firmly. "Every word." The words rippled like a vow. Others joined. "I filmed it. It's live right now. Thousands are watching." The walls of silence that had protected Martin and his staff moments ago collapsed entirely. They were naked now, every insult and every action magnified, immortalized. Martin tried one last time, his voice breaking. This is a misunderstanding. If we could just—" Amara's eyes cut to him, calm and cold. He stopped mid-sentence, the weight of her gaze pressing harder than any word he could muster. The attendant finally broke, voice cracking. "I didn't know if I'd known who you were." The crowd gasped. That slip said it all. If she had looked like someone important, they would have treated her differently. The prejudice was plain, undeniable, spoken for the world to hear. Phones caught it. Gasps turned to murmurs. Murmurs to outrage. "You just admitted it." Unbelievable. People lose jobs for less than that. And through it all, Amara remained still, her silence towering above their panic. The witnesses, once passive, were her armor now, an audience turned into a jury, their verdict already forming. The staff weren't just losing control, they were collapsing, unraveling under the truth they had created with their own hands. And Amara hadn't even raised her voice. The room trembled with the weight of revelation. The staff who had mocked, accused, and humiliated were stripped bare before the witnesses. Phones framed every angle. No escape, no edit, no excuse. Amara Blake didn't rush. She allowed the silence to sit, heavy and undeniable, before she moved. Slowly, she raised her phone again. One touch, one connection. The line clicked alive. "Miss Blake," came the crisp voice of her assistant, audible enough for those nearby to hear. "All systems are active. Do you wish to proceed?" Her gaze locked on Martin, then drifted to Melissa. Calm, cold, final. "Yes, proceed." The crowd stiffened as her words settled. "Confirm termination of Martin Kane and Melissa Hart. Revoke all credentials, effective immediately." The assistant's reply was sharp, efficient. "Processing now." A beat of silence. Then it happened. Martin's badge buzzed red, the digital denial tone echoing like a verdict. He jerked, staring at the plastic card in disbelief, as if it had betrayed him. Melissa fumbled at her lanyard, swiping at the desk scanner. Red. Again. Red. Again. Her breathing quickened, panic flooding her face. "No, this must be a mistake." The crowd erupted in gasps. Phones caught the instant collapse of authority, the reversal so absolute it bordered on surreal. A man in the back shouted, "She just fired them." Another added, "Right here, in front of everyone." Martin's jaw worked soundlessly. The man who had barked accusations moments ago now stood mute, powerless. His authority had evaporated not with a scream, but with a single command. Melissa's hands shook as she tore the badge from her neck, eyes darting wildly. "I didn't mean if I'd known." Amara's eyes didn't soften. "That's the problem," she said, voice low but slicing. "You treat respect as conditional. You respect only when you're forced to. That's not respect, it's fear." The line landed like steel. Phones captured every syllable. Witnesses nodded, murmuring. The businessman in navy whispered, "That's leadership. That's justice." The security officer, still at the edge of the crowd, straightened his stance. His hand moved away from his radio. He wasn't guarding Martin or Melissa anymore. His silence, his posture, belonged to Amara now. Martin finally spoke, his voice cracked, broken. "Please, just give me a chance." Amara stepped forward, blazer catching the glow of the overhead lights. "I gave you a chance," she replied, "and you used it to humiliate me, in front of them." She gestured at the witnesses, the jury of strangers whose judgment was already sealed. Her phone buzzed. A final confirmation. Terminations logged. Access permanently revoked. Amara didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply let the weight of her words linger. Justice doesn't shout. It acts. The witnesses erupted applause, cheers, a chorus of disbelief and triumph. The terminal was no longer on Martin's side, no longer neutral. It was hers. And with the verdict delivered, Amara turned not to leave, not yet, but to show what dignity looked like when it refused to bow. The red light of revoked badges still glowed in the witnesses' minds. Martin Kane and Melissa Hart just minutes ago, towering with authority, now stood hollow, stripped of power, their careers collapsed in front of strangers who would carry the memory forever. But Amara Blake didn't linger on their fall. She didn't gloat. She didn't even look at them again. She turned instead to the crowd, the mothers clutching children, the college kid holding his phone steady, the businessman shaking his head in disbelief. They weren't just witnesses anymore. They were the reason she had chosen silence until now. "You saw it," she said, her voice low, calm, and steady. "You heard every word. And now you understand, this was never about a ticket. It was never about a policy. It was about respect, about dignity." Murmurs of agreement rolled through the room. Some clapped softly. Others nodded, lips pressed tight with recognition. Amara adjusted the strap of her bag, her white blazer catching the light as she stepped toward the gate scanner. The attendant at the counter, one of the few who hadn't spoken, hurriedly scanned her ID. The screen blinked green. Blake, Amara, executive priority. The crowd erupted not in chaos, but in applause. A sound sharp and cleansing, like a verdict sealed. The businessman whispered, "Unbelievable." She walked through anyway. The teenager in the cap shouted, "That's real power!" The woman in denim muttered, "She didn't have to scream once." Amara walked forward, each step deliberate, unhurried. The path parted naturally, the witnesses giving way, their cameras following her like a procession. At the threshold of the jet bridge, she paused not to look back at Martin or Melissa, not to scold, not to gloat. She paused only long enough for the crowd to feel the weight of her final words. "You mistook silence for submission," she said evenly. "That was your last mistake." Then she turned and walked through the gate. Behind her, Martin sank into a chair, pale and trembling. Melissa buried her face in her hands. The witnesses buzzed, uploading, streaming, sharing. The story had already left the terminal. It was racing across networks, headlines, timelines. But Amara didn't need to see it. She didn't need confirmation that justice had been served. She carried it with her in the way the crowd's applause had filled the room, in the way silence had become her weapon, in the way she walked forward when others tried to hold her still. The voiceover closed. "Power isn't loud. Power isn't cruel. Power is the calm step through a door no one can close. And dignity walks with it." Fade to black.